Hey there, Dave Paulides, Canam Missing Project, copyrighted edition for our video channel. Thanks for being here. This is a missing person segment only, no news. So we're going to cover some letters, some talk. I'm always amazed of the number of emails I get from a variety of different sources, and I appreciate it. Got an interesting one this week from a couple of National Park Service rangers. And they follow my work, and they read the stories, and they understand something odd is going on. Well, these two brought up my work with a couple other rangers. And this person was saying that the other two rangers obviously had never read any of my books, obviously knew nothing about our work, other than propaganda that they had heard online from irreputable sources. And they said that they were almost attacked by these two about how stupid we were for reading that work. And they asked the guys, have you read any of Dave's work? Oh, no. Oh, okay. Well, if you haven't read any of the work, then how could you judge? Well, because we've read enough online to understand what he's doing. And in essence, the two that wrote to me said that these other individuals had no clue. They were believing sources that were not credible, and they did the best they could job to convince them. So that's pretty typical of people in our world who want to believe anything. And that is the danger, people. Just because somebody says something is true, do not believe it is true. Especially outlandish things. Aliens did this, aliens did that, aliens did this with our government. Folks, don't believe it. Unless you can find a factual trail of evidence that can point you, say, okay, that kind of proves it's true. Just because somebody said it, don't believe it. Please. I get people who write to me, talk to me, and say, oh yeah, this is happening in a national park. There's no evidence it's happening. There's no proof. There's nothing other than one person said it. I'm sorry. It's just the facts. So let's get into the letters. Hey, Dave. It would be an exaggeration to call this a theory, but I have some thoughts on two of the recurring themes in 411 scenarios. Perhaps you would find them worth a dime. Firstly, granite is pretty dense material, and this may constitute a good beacon when traveling in manner that allows passage through various types of matter, or just pushing it aside as Magneto aerodynamic model suggested by the late Stanton Friedman postulates, and as USOs apparently do. I'm just reading what he wrote. When wanting to find a planet, one looks for a dense cluster of matter. Just like when wanting to get to mountains looks for the highest points on the horizon. In other words, they approach us through concentrations of granite as it makes it easier for them to navigate. The other thing is returning of the bodies of missing individuals, both humans and animals. Not quite exactly where they went missing. In case of 411, and much closer in case of animal mutilations, it seems to be like when a fisherman pulls out a catch, checks it, measures it, takes a trophy photo, and throws it back into the water while his boat has made some distance in the meantime. Sometimes the checking takes a bit longer, so the fish lands back in its environment a bit further. On other occasions, the catch is used to prepare a bite, so only leftovers are thrown back, and thus we have a mutilation. It isn't a pretty analogy as fish, if unharmed, can for a short while survive on land, and so it lives. Apparently, we cannot survive such a transition. That is from our environment to theirs and back again. But from their point of view, that probably is of no concern. I'll skip over the obvious question as to who this may be, as I cannot offer any input on that. So your guess is as good as mine. Thanks for what you do. I think the analogy is pretty interesting, but if the technology is as advanced as it appears, getting us or putting a person back into the exact location isn't unusual. Say in mutilated cows, they're almost put back sometimes exactly where they were taken from. Other times they're found a short distance away. Other times they're not found at all. So it's a lot of things going on. As far as other things that are said, USOs on submerged objects like UFOs, the granite, I don't know. I just report the facts, but I appreciate the letter. It was good food for thought. Dave, I had no idea you spoke about mutilated cattle, that they can place them anywhere and they can put them in the same spot. What if they do not move them anywhere away, but process them invisibly on that spot instead? This idea could be supported by the fact that some of the missing people are found almost on the same spot they get lost. They just happen to be trapped in an invisible dimension, and when the circumstances cease to influence them, they get to the original spot but dead. As well as the ancient story you read from the Alps, I believe as the boy said, he was right there and people looking for him could not see him. He could not speak because he was scared of the black man that took him. Take care and be careful looking around more, because you now speak about some U.S. politicians. So, I mean, be more careful than before. I'm always careful. So, mutilated cattle. This specific question has been addressed many times by people way smarter than me that have investigated this for years. It's apparent and it's obvious that the cattle are never worked on the spot, because there's no blood on the ground. And the vast majority of the time, these cattle have no blood in them when they are found. So what's happening? Where's it being done? Well, it's not being done where they're taken and where they're placed back. And then in missing people, many times, the vast majority of the time, they are not found in the spot they were last seen. So don't think that. That's why searchers have to spend hours, days, weeks to find the people. Hey Dave, I recently came across your YouTube channel and find your videos to be informative and enjoyable. Now, I'm not trying to make them enjoyable, but trying to make them informative. To paraphrase one of your listeners, it's like getting together with friends at a coffee shop for a visit. So thanks for that. I appreciate the work you have done and you continue to do so. I'd like to share an experience that I had a long while back now, which is not nearly as eventful or dramatic as some of the stories you have been sent to you, but nonetheless made a lasting impression in my memory and might be of interest to you. I remember it vividly. It was the summer of '98. Sarah, my wife at the time, and I had spent the first week of our vacation with my parents and siblings in Michigan's Upper Peninsula along the southern shore of Lake Superior. Camping, canoeing, near the mouth of the Two-Hearted River. It's a wild and beautiful place that I've been visited since my childhood, and I always seem to go back. Set the stage for you folks. That area has a ton of disappearances. Air, land, water, both, all three. And still a very active area. It intrigues me greatly. Sarah and I had not spent much time in the lower portion of Michigan before and decided to split off from the family to do some exploring for the remainder of our vacation. We spent several days relaxing at Lake Ann State Forest, then planned to break camp and spend a day hiking at Sleeping Bear Dunes, which culminates with a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan and its many shades of blue. This is where the story really begins. The day was sunny, hot. By late afternoon, the temperature on the dunes was probably hovering around 90 degrees or above, and we were ready to be done. And you failed to mention the humidity. Once we completed our hike, we planned to find a campsite, preferably by water, then drive back home to Ohio the following day. We stopped at a ranger station to inquire about campgrounds nearby, only to discover that pretty much every part of this was full. In retrospect, I should have expected it since it was a Friday in high summer, at a very popular destination. The ranger told us we were probably out of luck, though he knew of a trail camp some 10-mile distance, primarily used by equestrian campers that wasn't much to look at, but it would be an overnighter. We were grateful for the tip and thanked the ranger and set out for our destination, following the directions he had written down for us. The site wasn't too easy to find since it ended up being off-road, on a road, off another road. But we finally located it and pulled into the entrance. We traveled further down a dusty gravel course to a loop and a clearing with some trees and a hitching post for the horses. To our surprise, there was nobody there. My first thought was, perfect, we have the place all to ourselves. I turned off the van, we got out to look around and decided which site to choose. This is when things got a little odd. As an aside, I should point out that I've always considered myself to be somewhat of a psychic brick. If anyone is going to hear noises, ghosts, talk to the spirit guides, or have a premonition, it isn't going to be me. Not that I'm not open to it, I'm just not sensitive in that way. I get it. The sun was getting low in the sky and the air was still warm. It was quiet here and even peaceful. That's why why did I have a sense of growing unease? I scanned the area to explain my cognitive dissonance. There was this perceived danger coming from I didn't know where. All I saw was a quiet meadow with virtually no place for a threat to be concealed. I pushed down this feeling, telling myself I was just imagining things because I didn't want Sarah to worry. She looked at me and asked, "So what do you think?" "I don't know," I said. "Something feels a little off." She agreed all too quickly because she had been sensing the same thing, the same dread. I said, "Let's get the heck out of here." Without wasting another moment, we hurried back to the van, locked the doors, and got out, leaving a dust of clouds behind us. As we traveled east towards home, we talked about it, trying to understand what had just happened. There was absolutely no visual or auditory cue to indicate that anything was wrong with that camp, yet we both had a distinct feeling that something was very, very bad and was about to happen to us. Since then, I've never experienced that level of dread for something that didn't happen. Nearly 24 years later, I still think about it from time to time and wonder, what did we avoid? Had there been an axe murderer in camouflage hiding behind a tree ready to pounce on us? Maybe that feeling of unease is a precursor to an abduction event or a time-space portal. On multiple occasions, I've tried to locate the trail camp in question via the internet searches based on its probable position, but without success. Unfortunately, the original written note and directions have long been lost. Did we wander into and out of an unstable pocket of reality just before it collapsed? I'd love to know the answer. From a distance, though, I'm eternally thankful that we didn't experience it firsthand, whatever that was. Yeah, you're very lucky. But one of the things that I wish to implore on villagers is listen to that voice in your heart and your head that tells you something's not right, I need to move on. And listen to it and move on. It's been quite a few times where I've had that feeling, both as a policeman and camping, hiking around. And I always just move on. I don't try to be a tough guy and confront it. There's no rational reason to do that, because according to my work, you'll probably end up losing that battle. Hey Dave, I'm relatively new to your work as a missing persons investigator. I wanted to write to you and relate some of my own paranormal, or what some may call supernatural. Since you're open to some discussion, I've enjoyed the email reading section of your YouTube and hope this spurs it. A little history on myself. I was born in 1980, so I've been around the block a little. As far as religion goes, I gave my life to Jesus at the age of 5, quite intentionally. Even at the young age, I started having interactions with entities that I knew were hostile towards me. My parents and I visited a church that, unbeknownst to me, used to have a speakeasy in the basement, which was where the kids' church was. I remember being left alone there while the teacher went upstairs to get papers and feeling such evil that I could not stay. I ran out with full-on snot and tears, and my mother asked what the church used to be like. We never went back. After this, I've had a series of encounters, all differing in origins and depths. In '99, I was driving my car from Fargo, North Dakota to Fergus Falls, Minnesota. It was after dark, and of course I was in a hurry. I was driving an old Chevy Euro, and the headlights weren't great. Suddenly, my car was pushed to the center of the two lanes, and I saw a blurry beige blob go straight between my tires. I corrected the car back to my lane and kept driving. It took me a few seconds to realize that there was no wind, no push against the vehicle. I didn't see what pushed my car over, but I'm pretty darn convinced my life was spared that night. Fast forward to 2015. I now live in Alaska, just outside of Fairbanks, in the interior. We live right off the main highway, but there's nothing but native and state land for hundreds of miles behind my house. In the winter of 2015, I started hearing knocking in the woods straight across my lawn in a stand of trees. I'd also hear footsteps that I often assumed was my husband or my dog. But on late night trips to the outhouse, yes, we still have and use one. You poor person. In the winter of Alaska, going out to use the outhouse. Woo! In the winter of 2018, my 17-year-old daughter and I were home alone, as my husband works away on a military installation. I'd been hearing bumps against the side of the house in the back when no one else was home, but this time it was so loud it sounded like a 2x4 whacking the wall. My daughter promptly asked me if I had made that noise since she was in another room. We then went outside. No tracks in the snow, nothing rubbing, no wind. If it hadn't been for my daughter, there's a witness, my husband would think I was hallucinating. It was very real. My neighbor's wife was also suspected something like Sasquatch on their property and has ample amounts of trail cameras around the house as a result. I can tell you that if you believe there's Sasquatch around your house or coming to visit, the best thing you can do to get rid of them, put up cameras and turn on lights around the house. Form a perimeter. They'll go away. Trust me. That's what we recommend. And any reasonable researcher would tell you the same thing. Some researcher who's putting up cameras, forget it. All right. Canam missing. Hey, Dave, I'm writing from Australia. I love Australia. I miss you guys. Wish I could get down there for another book tour. In 2015, my dad was dying of cancer. I'd had a call telling me he only had days to live. He had been in a nursing home for 3 months because of this. I grabbed my clothes and my dog, Atticus, and his food and drove to my dad. I slept there for 2 nights, and on the third night, my dad was very close to death. There were 2 nurses, myself and my friend. She had just arrived about 5 minutes before my dad passed away. It was like he was waiting for somebody close to me to be with me. The most amazing thing about this was that when my dad took his last breath, my dog, Atticus, let out 2 loud whimpers. We all heard it, and we all just looked at each other. I've heard this before with dogs. They sense things of seeing a person's soul leave the body. What was also odd was that Atticus had always slept on my bed when my dad was home with the cancer and I was looking after him. He began sleeping on my dad's bed. And after my dad passed away, Atticus never slept on that bed again, nor on my dad's. He always slept in the lounge room on the sofa. I don't know why, but he just did. I'm a Christian, and Atticus passed away 2 months before his 15th birthday. I believe that with all my heart, Atticus is now in heaven with Dad. My dad loved Atticus, and Atticus loved him. Dogs are beautiful creatures, and I believe they know when someone is sick and can sense their pain. I was so blessed with a wonderful father and the most beautiful dog, but I know one day I'll see them again. Thank you for all your hard work that you do. Thank you so much for how you care for other people and for putting others before yourself. I know your son Ben is in a better place and with the Lord, and on the same day will come when you are reunited. God bless you, wishing you peace, love, strength, and happiness. Thank you. And thanks for the story about Atticus and your dad. It was a good one. Hey, Dave. Forgive me if you've addressed this elsewhere, but I just happened to reread the Washington Irving short story Rip Van Winkle, and it struck me how it bears several hallmarks of missing 411 cases. You have the protagonist entering a mountain area and encountering mysterious forces, time and space displacement, even mysterious water features and the notion of going uphill ascent. In Rip's case, he ends up returning. But two more interesting things. The basic form of the story is apparently drawn from a German folktale. But in his adaptation, Irving goes out of his way to make the connection to Native American spirits dwelling in the Catskills. Anyway, I just found it interesting that perhaps the earliest form of American literature bear a number of parallels to the wilderness cases you research today. Love your work, of course. Thank you. All the best, and God bless. Thank you. Never really talked about Rip, but it's a good point. If you think about how old that story is, and then you think about the missing 411 stories, some parallels there. And, as I've said before, I've written stories in the books going back to the 1600s. And before that, newspapers are hard to find, stories are hard to find credible. 1600s. That's old. Next letter. Hey, Dave. Just wanted to reach out to you to send you this message of encouragement about all the hard work you're doing in both the news, mental health, and the missing 411 cases. Look forward to your videos every day, and I really enjoy listening to you talk and give the facts about what's happening in our world as well as the missing 411. I've watched both your movies. The movies, remember, Missing 411, Missing 411, The Hunted. Several times. Read 6 of your books, and I'm currently reading Missing 411 Hunters. I remember a video you uploaded a few weeks ago about yourself and people seeing an object that would flash different colors in the sky. It would be stationary close to the horizon at night. You wanted to know if anyone spots this phenomenon. So I wanted to tell you about seeing what I believe was a color-flashing UFO right outside my house, a Tuesday night, February 15th, around 10:30 at night. It looked like a very bright star. It was about 30 degrees above the tree line in a northeasterly direction from my back porch. My wife and niece saw it too. Live about 10 minutes from McGee Tyson Airport just outside of Alcoa, Tennessee. Been there many times. That's really the closest airport to fly into if you're going to Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The object appeared to be hovering in the direction of the northeast corner of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I tried to look at it through a pair of binoculars, but it was extremely difficult to get into focus. The moon was out directly overhead, and I would look at it to see if something was wrong with my binoculars, but I could get the moon into focus just fine. I would look at the object again, and it would be out of focus again. My hands were a bit shaky, so I finally put both elbows down on a handrail and looked at it with one eye only, and was able to get it to a point of light. Never saw a dish shape, but whatever it was must have been at an extreme distance from my location. The object appeared to be flashing red, green, and white very quickly and repetitively over the course of an hour. I spent about 45 minutes trying to look at it and get it into focus. It was a bit cold that night, and I would go outside and come back in, and the object would still be there. I wanted to wait until the next night on Wednesday, last night, to see if it would appear again, but it didn't. It didn't show up, which leads me to think it was not a planet or a star. I'm glad I watched your video about Les Stroud seeing something unusual and forgetting to get his camera, as is exactly what happened to me. For some reason, I didn't even think to get my phone or try to get a picture of it. If I could have gotten a picture, I would have sent it to you. Anyway, Dave, you're always in my thoughts. and prayers, and I want to thank you again for all your hard work. You have been an incredible source of encouragement for me as I have struggled with a lot of suicidal thoughts and depression, especially in the last year. Dave, I never got a chance to be a dad, but I have a little 4-year-old niece who doesn't have a father figure in her life. And my wife and I love if she was our own. I do not take to heart what you are saying, and I believe many others are too. I do take it to heart. I know you have a lot of mail to read, so we'll close by saying thank you from the bottom of my heart. Well, let me say to you that I think all kids need a mother and a father in a relationship because they had balance. There's different things about men and women. And I think everybody knows how to describe a woman. And I sure as heck know I can. And a little girl or a little boy needs to understand how men think, how women think, how men act, how women act, how a man's thinking process works, how a women's thinking process works, how men prioritize similar things as women, and how important it is to see a positive interaction between a man and a woman in a relationship that are mature. And I don't mean old. I mean that are happy and secure in their relationship, and those kids can see that because they learn from that. There's no yelling. There's no abnormal behavior. It's really important for kids to see and to be around that. And I hope you get a chance to spend a lot more time around your niece. So friends, thank you for writing. I greatly appreciate this, and I learn a lot from what people send. I'll say it again, if you have an unusual story, when you're in the woods, camping, hiking, I'm really interested in those. And I will always keep confidentiality if you ask. As you can see, normally I don't read people's names. It's unimportant to the story. I will say where it happened though. So on to the stories. We've got some doozies for you today. First one, 3-year-old boy, Mickey O'Connor. And if you think about the far northeastern corner of Wyoming, that's the area we're going to talk about. Now, Mickey first disappeared in July 1948. He was missing for 24 hours, and he was found 8 miles from home. Now, let me say that there isn't a search and rescue manual around that would peg an 8-year-old to travel, a 3-year-old to travel 8 miles in 24 hours. 95% of all 3-year-olds are found in a radius of 2 miles or less from the point they were last seen, or from his house. Now, in Mickey's incident, he lived in a home near a creek in the woods. How he got 8 miles away, I have no clue. But that really isn't what this story is about, but that's to give you some perspective and to help you with the perspective. So, it's a map. This is South Dakota. This is Montana. This area in here is Wyoming. Here's Devil's Tower right here. And this is the residence of the O'Connors. It was just off of a creek called Beaver Creek, and it was between Alva and Aladdin, Wyoming. You got the picture in your mind now. So, Mickey's mother was raised within 4 miles of where this incident happened, and her mom lived there up until just recently of July 1948. Now, the mother was living alone, and she decided that she wanted to move to Tacoma, Washington. So Mr. O'Connor loaded up his truck and drove his stepmom, mother-in-law, to Tacoma, dropped her off, and was on his way back. So this was October 1948, and Mrs. O'Connor was at the residence with her son, Mickey, their dog, their daughter, and her daughter was Betty Joan, who was 5 years old. Mickey was 3. They were at their home. Well, on October 8th, 1948, it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Mickey asks if he can go out into the backyard and play with the pet fawn deer. What a pet that they had in the back. Just so you know, it's against the law to have wildlife as a pet, but this was 1948. Mom said okay. She stayed in the home with the daughter and the dog. So Mickey's out in the backyard. Miss O'Connor said that the fawn had a bell that the kids put around its neck so they could find it. And after about 5 minutes, Mrs. Connor went into the backyard and couldn't find Mickey. Called him, yelled for him. The fawn was gone. She didn't hear the bell. This was just after 5 minutes. So she searched until dark, and then she called authorities. She called the local sheriff, and she called the U.S. Forest Service ranger that lived nearby. They both responded. They yelled, tried to listen for the bell, nothing. And early that next morning, a local Air Force base sent 70 soldiers to the home, along with over 200 neighbors. And the ranger and the sheriff set up search parameters. So they knew that Mickey was found 8 miles away months earlier, in July. It was now October. So they were pushing out pretty hard. They also knew, though, that the boy didn't have any shoes on, so they didn't think he would go far. They put up 3 airplanes, and over 100 people the next day were there on horseback. And about a mile away, one of the searchers found what they thought was a human footprint in the dirt. But the ground around it had been trampled hard by searchers before. But they thought that they had some clue. So they had canines come out and put them on the scent. And the canines couldn't find a scent trail from that old dirt road area. And it was an old dirt road. It wasn't drivable. So the formal search lasted until the 9th of October. It lasted until the 14th of October, 5 days. There were multiple private searches. But what really concerned the Forest Service and the sheriff was that temperatures were getting down into the 20-degree mark. The area around the cabin was scrub trees, but then it quickly went to big fir trees. And this is the one area of this part of Wyoming where there were big trees. And the family lived off what was called Beaver Creek. And there were beaver dams on the creek. All of those were searched. And then they even tried searching other larger bodies of water miles away. The fawn came back 2 days after Mickey disappeared. So the searchers on the last day of the search decided to get the family dog, put him out in the field and see what he'd do. He didn't do anything. It was disheartening. And they didn't quite know how to explain that. Now, if you look at this map again, this area of Montana up in here has almost nobody that went missing. This area of South Dakota and North Dakota has almost nobody that disappeared. But this area of Wyoming, the far eastern side, has had a few disappearances. But what's really intriguing to me is that Mickey disappeared in a high forested area about 20 air miles from Devil's Tower. I've told you before that locations get their name for a reason. Now, in this instance, he's in a very, very rural area without a lot of people, but the Forest Service ranger was specifically asked by a news source if a bear could have gotten Mickey. They said no. There were no bears in 1948 in this part of Wyoming, which I thought was fascinating because I do believe there are bears there now. So Mr. O'Connor arrived the second day the search was going on. He drove straight back. And he participated every day in the search nonstop. Got just a few hours of sleep. It was hard because eventually searchers had to call it. It was dusty, it was dry, it was cold, there was no snow on the ground. They never found Mickey O'Connor. And that really, truly devastated this family. They still have their daughter. But as I've told you before, these incidents, for some reason, have a habit of occurring when the dad isn't on the property. I really can't explain that. But this area of Wyoming, let me just say, the area in Wyoming has some of the strangest occurrences I can ever explain. So, before I go on to the next story, many of you have not read Missing 411, A Sobering Coincidence. It's a story about young men who disappear and are later found in a body of water. There's never tracks going to the water. There's never any understanding of how the body ever got into the water. And all of the stories are cookie cutters of each other. In that book, I wrote a huge section about Wisconsin, Minnesota, the United Kingdom. That has a big cluster of these. And they fit the 411 profile to a T. So I would encourage you to read the stories. Now, this incident happened to a man named Ron Dowdle. He was 26 years old. He went missing April 4th, 2002 at 2:30 a.m. in Covington, Kentucky. Lon was from Goldwater, Alabama. He was a newlywed. His wife was named Monique. He had gone to Auburn University and was an honored student, a standout student. He was known to be a great tennis player, an avid hunter, and a loyal member of the United Methodist Church. He was employed by a company called Madix, M-A-D-I-X, as a sales rep. He still lived in Alabama. But he came to Covington because of a business trip related to a golf outing. I can tell you, as somebody who's done a lot of those, they are really fun if they're put on correctly. So I understand why Lon went. I would have went too. But before the golf tournament started, he went out a day early and met his best friend, a guy named John Dark. They'd been friends for a lifetime. And they both considered each other best friends. And on the night of April 3rd, John and Lon went out into Cincinnati in Covington to spend the night. On the north side of the Ohio River is Cincinnati, and on the south side of the Ohio River is Covington. Now, Lon, clean-cut kid, athlete, took life seriously. Well, the pair went out, started at 7:30 at night, and they spent a lot of time in Cincinnati, and then they spent a lot of time in Covington, and at the end of the night, they came back to Covington. Well, they ended up taking a cab from the waterfront back towards the Holiday Inn in Covington, where they were both staying. And they decided that they would go to the Waffle House across the street from the Holiday Inn and grab some late night food. Well, I've done this before. So this is the Waffle House. It's Ohio River. Cincinnati would be up in here. Now directly across the street from the Waffle House is the Holiday Inn. And then this is Gable, G-O-E-B-E-L, Gable Park, just a block and a half away. So they arrive at the Waffle House and they get out of the car, and Lon gives the cab driver $20, which was way more than the cost of the cab, because they only came, I don't know, from the waterfront, 10 blocks. So John saw this and said, oh no, we need some change. Lon said, hey, they were in the midst of this transaction, and Lon says to John, hey, I'm going to be back in right here in just a minute. And he points his finger to the ground. And John says, I didn't think anything of it. I thought he was going to walk into the woods and take a leak. So John gets the money back from the cab driver, and he stands there waiting. Waiting, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. He decides to go in the direction that he last saw Lon walking, towards that Gable Park, to look for his friend. Well, he looks around, he can't find anybody, so he goes back to the hotel. Goes back to the Holiday Inn, checks the room, his friend's not there, and he waits 6 hours hoping that he's going to come back. He doesn't come back. Now remember, I want to make this clear. The Ohio River's in this direction, north. From the Waffle House, Lon went south. It's important. It's really important. Pay attention. So the next morning, Lon calls his dad. Then he calls Lon's dad. Both families were really tight, lifetime friends. And then Mr. Dark and Mr. Dowdle drive out to Covington because they know something serious has happened. Police are called, and they're searching Gable Park. They're searching the woods in that area. They put up a plane. They're looking everywhere. They're not finding anything. Now, in a news story, Lon's dad was asked, what kind of person was Lon? He said he was smart, athletic, reliable, trustworthy, perfect son. Wow. Hard to take, because they searched for 3 days, didn't find anything. April 10th, 6 days after Lon went missing, witnesses saw a body in the Ohio River near Covington, and they pull the body from the water, and they figure out it's Lon. There's alcohol in his body, and there were residual amounts of some other drug. But the coroner made a special case to say that The amount of alcohol and the amount of drugs that were in the system were not enough to cause the death. And death was caused by freshwater drowning. Friends, if I had one of those cases, or had 5 of those cases, probably wouldn't think much about it. It took me reading about 20 cases before I finally figured out these are all the same. These are all the same. As I stated in Missing 411, A Sobering Coincidence, it wasn't until a husband and wife read the coroner's report coming out of a Wisconsin case, and they said, there's more to this than what that report says. So they paid for a secondary autopsy, which costs about $2,000. Now, there's a coroner's office is bound by expense. And every time they run a chemical test on blood and urine looking for drugs, it costs them money. The more drugs they look for, the more money it costs them. So a standard screening panel has 22 drugs that they look for. But one of those drugs that isn't on the screening panel is GHB. It's commonly called the date rape drug. The reality is, in Wisconsin, these people that asked for a second autopsy and did a screening for 50 drugs, they found a huge amount of GHB in their son's body. One big problem with that case, it wasn't around a lot of people. Nobody had a way to spike his drink. So how did that happen? Now, GHB will make you essentially feel completely relaxed, but you can't move. So if somebody put you in water like a river, you would drown, and the cause of death would be freshwater drowning if it was fresh water. The vast majority of all the cases never test for GHB. Now, as I've told people, I'll tell you this again. GHB is produced in infinitesimal amounts by the body. And I've always wondered if somehow, somewhere, some being found the ability to turn on that faucet so that that function within our body could produce huge amounts of GHB. Just thinking out loud. Or somehow or another was Lon taken and given GHB and then later drowned. Because Lon Dowdle's case is an exact cookie cutter for other cases I've worked. Just like this in all parts of the world. In all parts of the world. A lot of these cases are in the UK, Spain, US, Canada. It goes on. I think some people have a hard time understanding what I say about this, because when I say that there's no tracks from point A to the river, in Wisconsin, a lot of these young men disappeared in a bar where there was a lot of snow on the ground. And they looked through the snow and there were no tracks from where the bar was to where the river was. Remember what I told you? Lon Dowdle was going south, which is why they searched the park, but the river was north. A couple of questions. Did Lon have to go to the bathroom and that's why he told his friend, I'll be back in a second? But then I would ask myself, I'm going into a Waffle House that has a restroom. Why don't I just go in there and use theirs? I don't know. Maybe they'd been to this Waffle House before and it didn't have a bathroom. I have no clue. But how, if Lon was going south did his body end up on the banks of the Ohio River 6 days after his friend last saw him? How? And that question's been asked 100 times or more in my books. And the profile that we look for in those cases was Lon Dowdle. Athlete, super smart. How does this happen? And friends, these cases have gone on a long time. They've gone on for hundreds of years. This isn't new. So don't think that there's some serial killer out looking to kill these men. And the real weird thing is, out of the hundreds of cases I've read and documented about this type of incident, there's only been a handful of cases, a couple, that involve women. Why would that be the case? Think about it. Many of you have told me just in the last week that you were unsubscribed from the channel and you were not getting notifications. Proof that YouTube is manipulating my numbers and my contacts. Others of you have said that you've gotten a survey about my video. So I appreciate that. Now, for me, the best thing you can do is to give me a thumbs up, because that's an indicator to people that really don't know if the video is worth watching. Make sure you're subscribed and post this on other social media sites and spread the word. We really need this to get out to people who haven't heard of us. And that's really the key to our success. And each one of you are distinctly important and distinctly different. We talked a little bit about mental health tonight. And I know that mental health crisis in America is still happening. And it's young people. And I feel for you. And I hope your school is not making you mask up. I hope you have the ability to talk to people eye to eye like I do. Analyze facial expression. It's important. It's a whole part of life. One other thing, and this is really important. If you're a young person out there and you're watching me, do not underline, bullet point, you do not have to go to college to be a good person, to be a productive member of society, and to be honorable in our world. No. Mike Rowe, I would encourage you to watch him. Started with a series called Dirty Jobs. I used to love that series. But Mike Rowe has a foundation that specifically deals with people who go into other lines of work. Plumbers, electricians, etc. We desperately need those people in our world. And he talks about how some of these people, when they commit themselves, make way over $100,000 a year. Which is true. They're highly paid. I know, because I call them every once in a while. And I respect them. Hardworking people. So just because you don't have an inclination to go to college, you're not interested, don't waste your money. Don't get in debt doing something you don't want to do. I know a lot of people that have degrees from college and they're unemployed and they're in debt. Don't do it. Plumbers, electricians, we need them. Need them desperately. And there's many other labor type jobs we need in a huge way. Start your own business. Hire other people after you get established to do work for you. many options in this world, and all of them don't lead to college. So, thanks for being here. You are appreciated. Our village cares for people. And I am going to leave this room right now. And I've got to go do some work, get some things done in town. And I guarantee to you for a fact, I will do something for someone to make their day more enjoyable and easier on them. And I do that every day. It's part of being a good person. I want you to do that too, because that's part of our village edict. Be safe. Love your family. Watch your videos. There's almost 250 approaching now on this channel that you can watch. And again, I've made videos in Australia and in the US. So please watch up. Paulides out.